With the PE waivers, so we went through, the board had asked us to focus on PE waivers. At the June board meeting, the suggestion was that we look to opening up PE waivers for 9 through 12. And then there was, I suggested that we consider keeping PE as a freshman year course, and then it's a freshman and sophomore year course because they have to take health as a sophomore, and the board said no, we allow kids to waive out of PE as freshmen in marching band. We should look into that for PE waivers. So the first thing we did, which is included in your packet, is Beth did pull the specific PE language from the school code. And as you can see, it is limited to 11th and 12th graders, 11th and 12th graders that are involved in an athletics ongoing participation in interscholastic sport. However, Marianne, can you go to that? I think it's on page 119. Now, it does offer on a case-by-case basis that you could do a PE waiver for a 9th or a 10th grade student in the event if they have a special case. But it predominantly says that it should be limited to 11th and 12th grade. The committee's interpretation, or the advisory council's interpretation of those special cases, like every once in a while we'll get a student that, I know I had this at Bartlett, was like a world-class figure skater and was trying to make the Olympic team. And so there's a student that was training before and after school in figure skating, and could show proof that was doing extreme training year-round. And so we were able to make a special accommodation for that. And Beth, you would know best if we've done that in the past here. What it is?
Yes, we've had a couple of gymnasts that we've allowed to have a PE waiver so that they could leave the building at the end of 6th hour to go to training, and would be required to have a note from their coach. I would say maybe one a year, maybe two.
And so the big question is that the board's big question was, well, why aren't we just giving that student the flexibility to take a study hall for the entire semester? Obviously, you can see how the language is kind of written and how it's written in our board policy, where it says ongoing participation. So that would be whether or not we feel that we can, we would have to talk with legal counsel if we feel we have flexibility to do a semester. Now, as I say, shared historically, we fixed the marching band because it used to be for an entire year. And so, as Mr. Frankel brought up earlier about some students, maybe manipulating the system in order to take additional courses and to raise their class rank and GPA, that's something the previous board had identified, that students were taking marching band. Our marching band only participates in the fall in marching, and they only participate at home games, which are like 4 to 5 times a year. And so this is something that's not like they're a competitive marching band that participates year-round or does parades year-round. And so that board decided to do where they could only waive out of PE for the fall semester. The one other question that did come up during the advisory council was the discussion of how would this work procedurally. And so I'll let Beth touch on that, and then the board can ask questions after that.
Yeah, I think that would definitely be a challenge, since we section so early. We have our students select their classes starting in as early as November, and when we begin sectioning for staffing, the students are scheduled into a PE class, and then how it works now is once a student is on a varsity sport, they request a PE waiver. Once we have the paperwork, the counselor double books them in the PE class and study hall so that it holds their spot. And then once, if they, for whatever reason, leave the team or are no longer allowed to be on the team for academic reasons, behavior issues, or when their season ends, then they are dropped from the study hall and put back into their PE class. So the challenge would be to come up with a way for varsity coaches to somehow keep a list, let us know which students are going to be making this varsity team, for the upcoming school year. The high probability that they will. And then we would have to make sure that when we were sectioning, that even though those students weren't counted into the numbers, that we would have to leave spaces for students that might end up back in a PE for a number of reasons.
They didn't make the team, or if they got cut, or
right, they just
quit.
didn't. Right, they quit. They no longer want to
Ineligible.
participate. I mean, any number of reasons. So we would have to. We would be kind of guessing, especially in the first year, what that would look like. And then I'm guessing that they would be in a study hall, right? They wouldn't be taking an additional course, because then that would kind of go against what we're trying to do right now with class rank. Like, a student would be in a study hall. The whole purpose of the student being a study hall is, if they're in a varsity sport, is to allow them time to work on academics, because they have practice and they have games after school. So I think that's always been my understanding of why a student has the opportunity to waive out of PE. And not all of our athletes do. Some of our athletes stay in PE, and then we have a number of our coaches that actually encourage students to be in PE and take conditioning, as it's sort of an additional practice during the school day. So the logistics would be something we would definitely have to work through.
So if a kid picked a PE waiver in November and picked another course, then all of a sudden it comes and they don't make that team, they've been sitting for 9 to 10 weeks. Let's say they were trying out for a winter sport, right?
Right.
So they could be taking a PE waiver, would be in another course for half a semester, almost half a year already, and then they would be short of credit in graduation because of the PE, not having the PE, right?
Right, and then
I would assume the way we would-
you're building FTE for classes that you're not necessarily guaranteeing that student is going to be in. I mean, if for
Is there
some
any-
reason they have to.
Do you see any way to address the board's concerns from the June meeting in modifying this policy? Is there anything that we're missing in regards to the PE waivers?
I mean, the way I've always interpreted is, and the way I read it is, it's when they are in season.
Okay.
When they're in
Do we
season,
allow
they're.
kids that get out of PE for marching band to take another class?
No, so they're taking, no, the marching band
Is in lieu of PE?
is in lieu of PE, correct, right. For a semester.
Right, so
Right.
that,
But the language in the board policy specifically says marching band
Fall semester.
during the semester.
right.
So that's why,
So the old language used to be marching band, and then those kids would take something else second semester.
the loophole was that another way to waive out a PE is if you're taking a course that's specific for a graduation or for college admissions. So students were taking AP courses and saying that they would need that for college admissions. Now if that's the way to get out of PE, we actually require that they get something specific from the college, that they need to take a course in order for them to have admission. Sometimes it's like specific for like a program that does like a dual enrollment where it's, they can get into like a pre-med program or a pre-vet program. So maybe they need to take both AP chemistry and AP biology their senior year, and the only way to do that is to waive out of PE. So
We count PE in the GPA requirements currently.
do we count PE in the yeah?
We
yes,
grade it like a GPA course.
It's a course.
And when the way it's written in the state guidelines is students have to take 4 years of PE, but it's not necessarily a graduation requirement, correct?
The language is written that a student needs to be engaged in physical activity every day unless they are participating in, sports, unless they're taking health. But there's no specific credits. So that's why some schools will award PE a quarter credit and not a half credit, because there's nothing specific to the number of credits that are required. It's being enrolled in physical activity
So is
or
that something
participating.
that
3 days a week, right? Minimum of 3 days.
Yes, 3 days a week.
Is that something the Board of Education should be considering when we look at these graduation requirements, that maybe we don't address the PE things, but the PE waivers, but maybe PE E is not part of our graduation, a specific graduation requirement, or it's a pass-fail course instead of a, is that
But for
something
students that do well in PE, I think, they'll,
that
maybe the
helps
grade,
save their
maybe
G-
if they get an A in PE, it helps them.
Didn't Jim just say though before that they do have the option to take
They have a credit
no-
to take credit, no credit.
Credit, no
Mhm.
credit.
Yeah.
I don't know that everybody knows that, though, and so it'd be a shame for somebody's GPA to be affected because they just don't like PE.
Well, we have seen that. I mean, in my history as a principal and assistant principal, you see some kids that struggle with dressing for PE, or
Yeah.
they don't like to swim in the PE court. I mean, so there are some things like that, but I want to make sure the board is educated on all their options.
Yeah, again, the way I interpret it, and the way it has always been interpreted, is that since I've been here, is that really the waiver is during the season, and the PE is in place so that they have an opportunity to study, get homework done, and not be overwhelmed when they get home from a late game, and then they return back to PE after season.
I'm really confused now. While my 3 older kids were here, they had the waiver while they were in season the entire semester.
Different day, Laura. We did allow that, and that was when we were kind of using that loophole of like allowing a student to take a course for college admission.
Well, if they swam, so that first semester, they just had the study hall. Even after swimming stopped November, but they still had the study hall. They weren't forced to go into a gym class for the rest of that semester, which kind of helped them catch up because they had been in season most of the semester, so it helped them get caught up.
Beth, did the language change in the school code
No.
since that time?
No.
So how were we doing it in the past, that we were able to do that? Or were we just
I
doing
mean,
it?
We did that from
I think we were just doing it.
2000
I think
for
we were
a
just
long
doing
time.
We were just doing
We
it.
were just doing it, hear no evil, see no evil.
Well, and I
Okay.
did some research on this. There have been a couple of, I think it was Highland Park, that also figured out actually in January, right before we went into shelter in place, that they had been doing it wrong for years and had to make adjustments. So yeah, I think their legal counsel brought it to their attention, and then the board had to pivot, right, and make it right. So, that happens.
I think Wes and Deanna were the 2 main ones that were interested in the semester, and so, and what are your thoughts of what you're hearing tonight? Is there something that we're not considering, or is there anything we're missing, or?
No, I mean, I think the statute on the 11th and 12th grade is pretty clear,
Okay.
right? So I think that answers one question that I had. And I think there's kind of 2 thoughts. Like, one is, what is, to Laura's point, what's the expectation of the student athlete? Is that going back to a gym class when they've been performing, assumingly at a pretty high level as a junior or senior, going back for 3 weeks of a PE class? What's the real physical benefit to that student? I think there's probably some debate. So that's one thought process, and I certainly would not be in favor of having a student go back into a PE class for those last 3 weeks for a fall sport or whatever the case is. I think there's a scheduling question, right, which was raised. How do you predict it? You can't predict that my kid's going to make a varsity sport next year, right? We all assume our kids are going to make the varsity sport, but probably doesn't happen. So I think you can't really plan for it from a scheduling perspective. It's almost a matter of what's the percentage of kids that make varsity sports and understand the staffing requirements as a result of that.
I'm not even opposed to say JV. I mean, if they're in a sport, it's still the same amount of practice.
But it's limited to grades 11 and 12, so I'm just saying in general.
Well, I think JV can go up to 11.
Sure.
Right? So, I mean, I'm not opposed to including JV. They're training just as hard.
Sure.
Yeah, it's just 11 and 12-year-olds who play a sport.
Right,
11th and 12th grade.
Yeah.
right. But I don't think we have to limit it to just varsity.
Yeah, I mean, if you're running up and down a soccer field 10 miles a day,
Well, I
You got
think,
your energy.
one might be able to argue that participating in the sport 5 days, 6 days a week for the 9, 11, or 12 weeks, does that come out to the same thing of taking a PE class 3 days a week?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. But there's also the option, so it probably doesn't satisfy that 3 days a week. You're still looking for a waiver reason. What's the right waiver, right? So can the building principal grant a waiver under this for some reason for that remainder duration of the semester? And I think whatever Highland Park, I'd be curious to know what other schools do with this.
Can we pull that before? If not, is that something we could pull maybe for August to bring back some additional information? Maybe just have April or something, just pull to see like our schools doing for the quarter or semester.
What neighboring schools do?
Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, it also just has to be like an administrative
There's
issue, right?
flexibility built in this that if the student had to meet the graduation requirement, had other pressing needs, the principal could waive them out of PE. I think that's why the school code is written where, when it talks about high school diploma or minimum high school state requirements for a high school diploma, they do not have the PE requirement as part of the graduation credit. It's just like an additional caveat that you need to be involved in PE.
And if we were to look at the hours, you're looking at 3 hours a week. An athlete, whether they're JV or varsity, they're practicing 2 hours minimum. Swimmers are 4 hours, 5
Yeah,
times.
that's why I brought up I think
Yeah.
that would be the only way. I don't know if the school code's interpretation though says, hey, 3 hours a week for a 15-week semester is 45 hours.
Yeah.
And a student participating 10 hours a week in a 9-week season has exceeded those 45 hours, therefore they should be able to take a study hall, right?
Yeah, because the language does say enrolled in physical education, like daily physical education. Like
Yeah.
Dana said, the minimum 3 days a week, but that would be impossible to do with
Yeah.
our schedule.
Right.
I thought there was legislation in the last year or two about different exemptions too.
I think PE became part of that unfunded mandate discussion, and so that's why it's no longer a graduation requirement.
Maybe that's what changed that.
It's just
Okay.
encouraging, it's 3 days a week. A lot of schools have not moved. It's just hard to move to that because how do you schedule something for 3 days a week, right?
Unless you're on like block scheduling.
Block scheduling, or you do a remote piece where kids turn in evidence that they're doing an independent study in PE. I still think from a scheduling perspective, it would cause us turmoil, and that even if the board wanted to go to the semester thing and we feel that legal counsel says we have some movement to do it, I still think you're gonna have to schedule those kids for PE, or those kids are gonna have to understand that if they do not make that team and do not have that PE course scheduled for that semester, they are now delinquent that half a credit. And they're gonna have to figure out how to do an extra PE course somewhere before graduation. We do not offer summer school PE. Right, so I mean, that's the other thing that's a possibility that we'd have to consider.
My
So-
understanding is they don't need PE all 4 years.
It's 3.5.
3.5, so they actually have a half semester
They
to
take
toilet.
the other half semester as health,
Yeah,
that's
health.
required.
Oh,
So they don't really have a lot of room to play with that. Kylie, as an assistant principal curriculum instruction, what's your recommendation? We're gonna vote on it right now, no, just kidding. I thought you would.
Is this thing on? No. Are you really asking me that
Yeah,
though?
any other input that you want to provide that I'm missing here, or that could be
No, I mean,
considered
I
for
think,
August?
I think Beth covered it. I think, for us, I think that one of the biggest concerns with scheduling, because, we're very much trying to accurately project our FTE and not have, gaps and holes and overstaff and, those sorts of things. That would be, a big concern for me. But I think that, I don't know.
So, if we're talking about a kid, he gets cut or gets ineligible, those are the kids we're talking about. But
Gets cut, is ineligible.
Or decides they don't want to
Quits,
do it
doesn't
anymore.
even go out for it. The
yeah,
one thing we
so the
would
kid that
definitely
comes up
have,
says I'm going to play a sport and then doesn't because he's trying to get out of PE.
you would definitely not be able to schedule those kids for other classes,
No, you wouldn't.
right?
Right.
Because that would for sure cause a problem. So this would strictly need to be limited to whether or not the board wants to make it for a semester study hall or the quarter study hall.
And the amount of kids that get cut is a variable to how many go out for the sport or not, right? Like-
Fall sports are probably a little less cut sports, they're more of our
More
all-in
no-cut
sports. Winter sports are what basketball, girls basketball, boys basketball are more in line to cutting.
Baseball.
Baseball's a cut sport. I think girls volleyball, Dan, that cut sport? So boys and girls volleyball. So,
But you could,
Yeah, I think it's really hard to predict the year before.
And
yeah,
then
that's
I
what's
think
gonna be
it's-
tough. So I mean, at the
that
minimum, you
seems-
could just say it would be a semester. And I think you'd still have to leave some room for those kids that don't even
Mhm.
make the team. So I don't know, you know,
And again, then there's coaches that encourage students to participate in PE, again, just to get that additional workout in.
I think you could run into some trouble too, having to try to have coaches kind of forecast into the future.
Yeah.
I think you're putting your coaches in a sticky spot then, because what if
Yeah,
they
it could
forecast
hurt your
wrong?
leg.
Right,
Or
you're
what
letting a
if,
kid know, like, you're not making varsity when
sure, or
they're-
you're letting them know that they're making it, and then you're taking down what you might minimize what they do between now and then to prepare and get ready and become more conditioned. I think the
let's look
the
and see what other
coaching end.
schools do, and let's look and see if there's a way to provide the principal flexibility that if a student wanted to, they could stay in the study hall for a semester, but.
Can I just
What kind
ask
of answer?
one quick additional question? The genesis for this idea, where's it primarily coming from? Is this students sort of having brought this issue up, numerous times? Is it parents or
I think the board brought it
No,
up.
it's a board issue.
just the board
The board has brought it up.
question?
yeah, it just doesn't seem to make sense if a kid playing soccer and run up and down the field 10 miles a day and then he has to go back to PE. It's like, so it does come kind of out from the kids.
Well,
Why
like,
am I doing that?
and I think the discussion came in, like, the marching band kid after they're done when
Yeah,
if the fourth or fifth home game is done in early
Right.
October, that student's not getting anywhere near the physical activity of a PE class or a varsity sport. And they're waived out for the entire semester, even though
They're going back to a music class too, so it is.
right, but they're in that
yeah.
class, right?
Mhm.
Well, if the burden is physical activity,
Mhm.
right, then they're not really getting it.
yeah, do they march in that field a lot?
We could.
Living next to the field, I know, they're out there in 9 o'clock at night.
You have to stay
in a
through,
normal
you have to
year.
stay through halftime, and that could,
And they would stay if they stayed the whole game.
could count.
3 day a week.
Sure. All right, well, we can revisit that. Ladies, it's 9 o'clock. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Kylie, let's put this on our agenda still to revisit, just to make
Yes.
sure between you and Beth that we touch it again in August, okay?
Okay. Yep.
You want me to come back in August?
Well, we just, yeah.
Yep.
Please? You got it.
All right, we're gonna go on the
What else do you
FOIA.
have to do?
Moving on.
All right. 9 o'clock.
Third item on the
This sucker
agenda.
around here.
And
Third item on the
2 hours
agenda.
later.
Let's go.
Page 7.